Hey everybody, Andy Linneman here. I'm going to be back with John Foster. We're going to do our second episode of the All-22 guys. And today we're going to cover some stuff that we hope you'll be interested in. We're going to provide some tips on formations and snap counts. We're going to do a data dive with John Foster. We're then going to provide a tip for you on setting your depth charts each week. It's beginning to feel a lot like football.
Let's
Guys,
go.
episode 2 here. We don't know how many of these we're going to do, but we're going to start with, this is number 2. And the goal of these, we decided, was that, the reason we're doing this is to not only create connection, but also we felt like, John is new to All-22, and we felt like providing some tips to folks that are new might be helpful. So rather than figuring it out the hard way through the school of hard knocks, we feel like if you do it that way, it leads to imbalance in the league. We'd like to help people. We have more competition that way. And it also helps people maybe want to stay in the league and come back. So with that,
Well, my comment is that it's always fun if one team doesn't dominate. That if everybody is playing into the last weeks of it and competing and have a chance to make the playoffs versus completely checked out after week 6 because they're out of the league. So I really like competitive leagues. Of course I want to win and we all want to win, but it is a lot more fun when everybody's competitive.
yeah, I agree. And just to note, we put out so I'm a commissioner in another league that was a startup league that we just started a month or so ago. And there were several guys in that league that were new. So we put together some tutorial videos to help people. And the topics were things like how to make a trade, IR versus your active roster. One of the things that was real important about that was that I would suggest we're gonna embed those videos at the bottom. If you click the more button at the bottom of this video, we'll have those. But probably the most important video in there with the start of the season coming up is the recurring weekly calendar in All-22, which will talk about how you make bids, what that looks like. So if you are unfamiliar with the free agency system in All-22, definitely watch that video. It'll be in the link below. There's a tutorial video about formations and such, and you can watch that. But the main thing to know that I'm going to share here is that you have 3 formations you can choose on offense or defense. And you probably already know that. But the main thing to know about that is that locks Thursday night at 8 o'clock, or on Thanksgiving week, I think it's noon. So make sure you understand that if there's an injury that occurs or you change your mind during the weekend, it's too late. You've got to make that decision before Thursday. So that's a tip to know. As far as snaps are considered, you need to make sure that all of your starters get 20 snaps, except for your flex guy. So whoever that flex guy is on offense or defense, they only need 15 snaps. Punters and kickers need 1. If for some reason you get a guy who doesn't get the required number of snaps, the next man up will be promoted. So John, talk about, we had this crazy thing happen in the league last year. So my question to you is, as a new guy, do you know the answer to this? I think we've covered this. Do special teams snaps count as snaps in All-22? And is there anything to know about that?
So it's my understanding that special team snaps count, but you have to have a regular snap to make the special team snaps count. So if the only thing you took was special team snaps, you would not get credit for that. But if they play a regular down anywhere throughout the game, then their special teams add on to that number. That's my understanding.
That's exactly right. And you can see the total snaps. So that's really well done. I didn't know that until last year. We had that happen in our league, and we had somebody who had like 22 snaps and they got a 0. And they asked me, I'm the commissioner of that league. I'm like, that's got to be a mistake. And I reached out to Ray, who was like, no, that's a rule that you've got to have at least 1 snap. So to my knowledge, that's still true. I had never seen that rule anywhere. But like, as you're choosing players and setting up your depth chart for the week, just remember you don't want to choose anybody who only gets special team snaps. And you can look at a player's card and you can see their run snaps and passing snaps, but you have to go to that middle tab in order to see their total snaps, because that adds in running, passing, and special team snaps. So
Well, and that's something that I made a mistake on in the early part of this,
that's right.
counting snaps of players to say how many weeks were they getting 20 snaps, and then was talking to you about it, and you're like, well, go to the middle tab and you'll see that this person scored every single
I forgot
week.
about that. Yeah, we were talking
Yeah,
about that at breakfast
and
one day.
I didn't know that. So I was looking at their snaps on the first page of the player profile and not going to the second tab
Yeah, and
of
the nice thing about that second tab is it also does the math for you. So you don't have to worry about how many we're running, how many we're passing. And because special teams are included there, and that'll be the total that they'll pull into. So like once there's a game, we go to the matchup tab. That's where you're actually watching your matchup, and the grades where they drop will be in that matchup tab on the All-22 platform. And that's where it's pulling that number of snaps. Those will tie with whatever is on that second page. So good stuff. So that leads us, that whole conversation about snaps leads us to an interesting conversation. I hope you'll find this to be the case around snaps. And I'm a big fan of the GM Shuffle. If you've never listened to the GM Shuffle podcast, Michael Lombardi, former NFL executive, has a lot of great insight in the NFL. And one of the things he's talked about, and I think this was a Bill Parcells thing, is that one of the keys to winning is figuring out how not to lose. And to me, the way not to lose in All-22, the way to give yourself a chance to win every week is to avoid taking a zero. And a zero is where the guy doesn't get the right number of snaps and you don't have anybody below them on your depth chart who gets auto subbed. You'll get a zero. And if you get a zero in your score that week, odds are you're going to lose, because the margin of victory in most of these games is usually a point or two. So
well, and
why don't you
from
take over and
from
talk about that?
and from the data you showed me from last year, I was going through and looking at that. Of the teams that didn't take a zero, they went 23-5.
Right. So there
Uh,
were 2 teams out of 12 that took no zeros in that league.
they went 23-5. The teams that took zeros went 40-41. So you look at it and you say you're 50-50 if you take a zero.
Yep.
And you're going to win if your likelihood of winning is a lot more if you don't take a zero. You still have to put the best players on the field, and they're going to have a good game. But if you take a zero, you're flipping a coin whether you're going to win. You have to win and take a zero. Your players have to excel and overachieve across the board.
Yep. Or maybe you're fortunate enough to be matched up against somebody who took a zero themselves.
Yep.
And out of that data, there were 4 teams last year in that league that took more than 6 zeros throughout the course of the season. And their combined record was 17-34-1. So, like, as you're building your plan for the week, if you're new at this, or even if you're not, if you haven't thought about that, like that was a real obvious thing to me. I went back and looked at that data from this league, is that it's very much about making sure you don't take a zero. And there was a common thing. It was either you didn't have enough, like it was a week where you had 2 guys on open date, you had 2 tackles, your 2 tackles on your bench had open dates, and your last tackle was out for the week, wasn't on IR, but was out for the week with an injury. And that team didn't react by making subsequent roster moves to put depth.
Pick up somebody.
And then one of the tackles gets hurt during the game and they get a zero and they lose that game. So keep that in mind. And the other one was, we saw this happen like 3 or 4 times last year. Sometimes people forget, like the last thing you think about is your punter and your kicker, because you just put them out there and forget about it. And then they have an open date and you realize after they play their game, oh man, I forgot that my kicker has an open date this week. You'll get a zero. It's not a huge decrement. Like you'd only lost maybe a half a point, but sometimes that's the difference between, that's the margin of victory in a lot of these games. So,
Well, I think that's just a key that you have to have a backup. Now, the fortunate piece in All-22 is your backup tackle is a swing tackle. doesn't really matter if he plays left side or right side. You don't have to back up your left tackle with a left tackle and your right tackle with a right tackle,
Mhm.
which would be what you'd have to do in a true game. But this, you just need two players to score well.
Okay, here's a tip on depth charts. This is kind of hard to explain, but the simple way to say it is, let's say you've got 5 offensive tackles, and one of these people is the tackle that would normally be tackle 2 for you in a typical week. But this tackle plays on Thursday night. So once that player's team, once that game starts, that individual is locked into your depth chart. So if you put that tackle at tackle number 2, that tackle is locked into the tackle 2 spot the rest of the weekend. But not only that, you cannot move anybody above them, or you can't move the player on top of them back down below that number 1 spot. So with that in mind, you can always move people around below that player who's played on Thursday night or Friday or Saturday, whatever the case might be. But once that player's team has played a game, that person is locked in your depth chart, which leads to this sort of tip, John.
If he's going to be number 2, make him number 1 because he plays Thursday. Then you can change 2, 3, 4, and 5 up until the time of the game starting that person plays in.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Like if you got a guy that's going to start in a position where you have, it's wide receiver, it's guard, it's linebacker, you're going to have 2 of them. Put that guy on Thursday at your number 1 spot for that week, because there's no advantage to having them at 2. And the only exception to that, John, would be like if it's a flex guy,
Yeah.
and you don't, right? Like you still may want to keep, that's the decision to make. If I have a flex guy who's playing on Thursday, am I better off keeping that person at number 3? Knowing that they're not going to be worth as much points. But if I do that, I can't maneuver that person around after that. Now, if they don't get the required number of snaps, now the next person will be auto subbed up. But unless it's a flex guy or a guy on your bench, if you're going to start them on Thursday, put them at the top spot is the tip there. So anything
It's
else?
much flexibility in between. And really, it only affects Thursday night, Monday night games generally. And then
You've
late
got
in the
Friday
season,
now,
but late in the season, when they start flexing games to Saturday and whatnot,
Saturday.
is when you really have to pay attention to it because you may have some players hurt. You have
Yeah,
some players on IR. Late in the season, this will become a much bigger deal than early in the season.
that's exactly
But
right.
it it's just something to think about. I didn't understand that. I went to you and asked about it. When up until when can you move a player? And that's when you said, hey, till that game happens. But here's the caveat to it: you can't jump him. You can't move somebody from third to first if the guy in number 2 has already played.
Yep.
So if he's in your top 2, that these are my 2 tackles I'm going to start, and one of them plays on Thursday, go ahead and put the one that plays on Thursday in the number 1 slot. Doesn't matter that he's really only your second tackle, but then if anything occurs and your number 1 tackle sits the game or anything else, you could then you could sub him in for somebody else or flip flop if there's questions there.
And really, you could even go as far, I don't know if I've ever really thought through this, but you could even go as far as to say, like, let's say I'll stick with the theme of tackle. We've been talking about tackles. You got a tackle who plays Sunday at 1, and you've got a tackle who plays on Monday night. But the guy who is on Monday night is usually your tackle 1. I would say for this week, make him tackle 2 for the same reason, that it just gives you added flexibility as you go throughout your day. Like if you're watching the game and the guy, maybe you're watching your hometown team and you watch your tackle leave the game after 3 plays. I saw a game last year where Mike Williams, the wide receiver for the Chargers, he had a lot of missed time, and he came back, and I think he was on the field for 2 plays. He caught a ball on the sideline, got hurt, and he left the game. And so in a situation like that, it would have been better if he's playing earlier to put him at the higher point of the depth chart, unless he's a flex player. So with that, John, thanks for your time. Great seeing you, buddy. Thanks again for this handsome shirt. that I donned again this evening. And I did that because for the guys in the Perseverance League or in the Fantasy Gridiron, you may not know this, but John's wife uh, embroidered this shirt for me using this fabulous Northern Kentucky Thunder logo. So he surprised us by popping down to our house a couple of Sundays ago. And Becky and John hung out with Mira and I for a little while, which was great fun. And I came away with this spectacular shirt. And you can have one with your team's logo on it. I'll negotiate that for you. Work through me. It'll involve trading for a quarterback in the You Got Moss League or for Trey Benson in the Fantasy Gridiron League. But that's all I got, man. Love you, man, brother. Hope you have a great night.
Okay.
See ya.
Salute.